Afternoon session 12 p.m. Jury not present.
The court said, "So the interpreters are telling me that they cannot follow the very quick language because it's technical, and so I'd like you both to slow down."
Mr. Horton said, "Understood, Your Honor."
The court said, "Please get the jurors."
Jury present.
The court said, "Please be seated. You may continue the inquiry."
Mr. Horton said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
By Mr. Horton.
Mr. Roberts, before the break, you were describing a video call you participated on in January 2023 with some people from the Himalaya Exchange. Who from the Himalaya Exchange was on that video call?
I recall that an individual I knew as Priya Patel attended that video call.
And were you able to see Ms. Patel on this call?
I do not recall being able to see Ms. Patel.
And what, if anything, did you see?
A black screen.
Were you able to see what, if anything, Ms. Patel was doing during this video call?
No.
On this call with the exchange in January 2023, what, if anything, did the exchange tell you about their blockchain activity?
I don't recall a specific response about blockchain activity other than the general discussion about the Himalaya dollar and the Himalaya coin.
And what, if anything, did the exchange tell you about whether the Himalaya dollar and the Himalaya coin was backed by gold?
I do not recall a response or any discussion about gold.
And on this January 2023 video call, what, if anything, did the exchange tell you about Miles Gua?
I recall that Bitgo had a question about Miles Gua and we had received a response and had some discussion about Miles Gua.
And why at this stage in your account review did Bitgo have a question about Miles Gua?
We had a question about Miles Gua because in the public domain, through Google searches, we identified some news articles and other information speculating about a connection between Miles Gua and Himalaya Exchange.
And what, if anything, did Ms. Patel or anyone else from the Himalaya Exchange tell you on this call about employing Miles Gua?
I recall hearing from Ms. Patel that Himalaya Exchange had no financial connection to Miles Gua.
And what impact, if any, did that statement, that the Himalaya Exchange had no financial connection with Miles Gua, have on your review?
We noted it, and it formed part of our analysis as we continued the investigation.
Mr. Roberts, on this call what information, if any, did you ask for from the Himalaya Exchange about the Himalaya dollar?
I recall we had some questions and a discussion on the reserves and the backing of the Himalaya dollar and that we requested some documentation in connection to that.
Mr. Horton said, "Ms. Loftus, can you please pull up for the witness what's been marked as Government Exhibit BR 208A? And if you could just go to its second page and then back to its first." Mr. Roberts, what is this document?
I understand this document to be an independent accountant's report issued by a company that I know as Armanino.
Have you seen it before?
Yes.
And where did you see it?
I recall first seeing this when we received an email from Ms. Patel containing attachments and documents that Bitgo had requested from her.
Mr. Horton said, "Your Honor, the government offers Government Exhibit BR 208A.
Mr. Skirik said, "No objection."
The court said, "It is admitted."
Government's Exhibit BR 208A received in evidence.
Mr. Horton said, "If you could please publish it, Ms. Loftus."
By Mr. Horton.
Now, Mr. Roberts, directing your attention to the top right of the first page where it says Armanino. And you just mentioned them. What was Armanino?
I am of the understanding that Armanino is an accounting and auditing firm.
And what's the title of this document?
The title is Independent Accountant's Report.
Mr. Horton said, "Ms. Loftus, if you could take us to the second page, please. And if you could zoom in at the top of the document above the word Notes. Now at the top left of this page, Mr. Roberts, it says Himalaya International Reserve. At this point in your review what, if anything, did you understand that Himalaya International Reserve was?
I don't recall having an immediate finding about that piece of information.
And the top middle of the page says Himalaya Dollar Bank and Fund Holdings Report, and there's a date of July 31, 2022. What did you understand this information to represent?
I understood that this information pertains to the reserves and currency behind the Himalaya dollar.
And the top line with the number next to it says, US dollars held in Himalaya-owned bank accounts. What's the value next to that line item? Mr. Roberts?
$401,163,865.60.
And Mr. Roberts, what, if anything, did this Armanino report that the Himalaya Exchange gave you say about gold reserves for the Himalaya dollar?
I do not recall making a finding about gold reserves on this document.
The line below this says, HDO-denominated liabilities issued, total. What did you understand that line to be?
I understood that this line was referring to the amount of value that was giving Himalaya dollar its stablecoin value.
And how, if at all, did that compare to the amount of Himalaya dollar you had observed in your blockchain analysis?
I recall finding this number to not correspond to the number of Himalaya dollar cryptocurrency tokens that I believe to be minted and in circulation.
Remind us what you understood the number of Himalaya dollar to be minted and in circulation.
I recall it being in the ballpark of 1 to 1.5 billion units.
And so what impact, if any, did that comparison between the amount of Himalaya dollar you'd observed minted and the amount reflected in this report? What impact, if any, did that have on your review of the Himalaya Exchange?
I recall finding that it posed questions as to whether the Himalaya dollar had a stable value to the US dollar.
And what do you mean that it posed questions about that?
What I mean about that is because this particular amount and the amount of Himalaya dollars that I took to be in circulation, those two amounts are different. And therefore how can, if there are 1 to 1.5 billion Himalaya dollar cryptocurrency tokens in circulation, how can they be worth, individually $1 when there isn't $1 in reserves backing that value?
And that view, the question that you just described, how, if at all, did that impact your analysis of Himalaya dollar?
I recall making findings questioning whether it is truly a stablecoin or not.
Mr. Horton said, and the line that starts, collateralized HDO tokens on the Ethereum blockchain, if you can highlight that. Ms. Loftus. What does that mean, collateralized HDO tokens on the Ethereum blockchain?
I recall this appearing to refer to the Himalaya dollar cryptocurrency units that are viewable on the Ethereum blockchain.
What's the number next to that?
That number is 0.
The line below that says, collateralized HDO credits on Himalaya ecosystem platforms. What do you understand that to mean? Mr. Roberts?
I understood Himalaya dollar credits to be a way that the Himalaya exchange expressed Himalaya dollar on their platform.
And Himalaya ecosystem platforms, what understanding, if any, did you have about what that was?
I recall taking this to be a reference to the Himalaya exchange.
And what, if anything, was your understanding from this document that the exchange provided you about whether HDO was on the blockchain?
Sorry. Can you repeat that question?
Yeah. What understanding, if any, did you have from this document that the exchange gave you about whether HDO was on the blockchain?
Well, I went back to my initial finding about the Himalaya dollar cryptocurrency that I could view on the blockchain and I recall making a finding that there is a cryptocurrency called Himalaya dollar on the blockchain.
And so the value of 0 on the line item here for tokens on, HDO tokens on the Ethereum blockchain. Seeing that value of 0 reported to you by the exchange, what impact, if any, did that have on your analysis of Himalaya dollar?
I recall it being another piece of information that made me question whether the Himalaya dollar that I could go and view on the Ethereum blockchain meets the definition or understanding of a stablecoin.
And why does?
Mr. Skirik said, objection.
Mr. Roberts, why did seeing, in this document that the exchange gave you, that the number of HDO tokens on the blockchain was 0 make you question whether it accorded with your understanding of a stablecoin?
Because as I understood the total amount of Himalaya dollar in circulation to be in the range of 1 to 1.5 billion. Seeing this number 0 made me question whether whether the Himalaya dollar on the blockchain had any value at all.
And if it was reported to you by the exchange that the HDO tokens were not on the blockchain. What understanding, if any, did you have about where the HDO tokens actually were?
Well, I understood the HDO tokens that I could see in the blockchain to still be on the blockchain.
And the HDO credits that are on the Himalaya ecosystem platforms, what did you understand that to mean?
I recall taking the view that this was a reference. An internal Himalaya exchange reference to the Himalaya dollar on their platform.
How does an internal platform, in your understanding, compare to the blockchain?
An internal platform may choose to operate on a private ledger that is not available to the public.
And what do you mean by private ledger?
What I mean by that is maintaining customer account balances. Customer transactions on a document or a database that is only, viewable to that platform.
And what understanding, if any, did you have about whether the Himalaya exchange operated an internal private ledger?
I recall taking the view that this information and other information we learned about the Himalaya dollar suggested that they were operating some type of private ledger to track transactions, customer balances, and so forth.
And what impact, if any, did your understanding that a private ledger was being used have on your analysis of the Himalaya exchange?
I recall having the view that they are operating a cryptocurrency exchange which has activity that is tracked on a private ledger.
And what impact, if any, did that fact have on your view of the exchange?
Mr. Skirik said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "The question is what impact did it have on his recommendation to his company?"
Mr. Horton said, "Yes, Your Honor." Mr. Roberts, what impact, if any, did your understanding that the Himalaya exchange operated as an internal ledger have on your recommendation to the company about its relationship with the Himalaya exchange?
I recall that being part of our analysis and findings when we got together to discuss the findings from our investigation.
And you say it was part of your analysis. What did it contribute to your analysis?
Mr. Skirik said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "You may answer."
I recall that it assisted in our understanding of how we thought that the Himalaya exchange operated.
And what is it about that fact, Mr. Roberts, the internal ledger, that contributed to your analysis of the exchange? How exactly was it relevant?
Well, to me, I took the understanding that transactions were occurring on a private ledger, not available for public viewing, so that the exchange, in combination with other findings, may have been operating a sort of closed-loop system.
And what does it mean for purposes of?
Mr. Skirik said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "Overruled."
Mr. Roberts, you said closed-loop system. What was the effect on your analysis? Why was it relevant to you, the finding that the exchange might be a closed-loop system?
I recall learning about transaction flows on the Himalaya exchange. I recall learning that customers of the Himalaya exchange were not able to withdraw H-coin or H-dollar. I also. Mr. Skirik said, "Objection to the hearsay."
The court said, "Overruled. You may continue."
And I recall learning that Himalaya exchange customers typically funded their account with some type of US dollar transfer, such as a wire transfer. These aspects led me to the belief that any type of H-coin, H-dollar activity on their exchange was all internal to their platform and there was no H-coin or H-dollar transactions going from, for example, the exchange to another platform on the blockchain.
And why did all that matter to your analysis?
That mattered to my analysis so I could understand Himalaya's business model.
Mr. Roberts, the observations you noted about Himalaya exchange appearing to be internal to you, what, if anything, did that suggest to you for purposes of your analysis?
Mr. Skirik said, "Objection."
Mr. Horton said, "I can try it a different way, Your Honor."
The court said, "Okay."
The findings you've just listed, That customers were unable to withdraw their coins from the exchange and that it appeared to you that the exchange operated as an internal ledger. What, if anything?
Mr. Skirrick said, objection.
Was the implication? Why did you include that information in the report?
Mr. Skirrick said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, what was the purpose of preparing your report?
The witness said, the purpose of our preparing the report was because we were conducting an account review into Himalaya Exchange.
The court said, and your account review would have an impact on what?
The witness said, it would have an impact on whether we felt that we had identified any financial crime red flags that would be escalated to more senior compliance management. By Mr. Horton.
Mr. Roberts, what, if anything? Was the relationship between your finding that the Himalaya Exchange appeared to be an internal ledger and the financial red flags that was the subject of your reporting?
I recall that this understanding that we had developed played a part in the financial crime red flags we identified and the subsequent escalation.
And when you say it played a part, what part did it play?
Mr. Skirrick said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
I recall finding that the exchange appeared to operate in a way that I find abnormal. Mr. Skirrick said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, overruled. You may continue.
The witness said, sorry, can I start just like a step back?
The court said yes.
In a way that I find abnormal for cryptocurrency exchanges to operate.
And what is it about an internal ledger that you found abnormal?
Mr. Skirrick said, continuing objection.
The court said, overruled.
It's not, to me, it's not the mere fact that it's an internal ledger. It was that there was no corresponding blockchain, very, very little corresponding blockchain activity. But there still appeared to be a very high market capitalization of H-coin, and it raised questions as to, why it had such a large market capitalization.
And what were the questions it raised about why H-coin's market capitalization appeared so large?
Mr. Skirrick said, same objection.
The court said, overruled. Please continue.
Going to what I talked about earlier. The math that we had performed to roughly calculate the price of an H-coin that we could see on the Himalaya exchange versus the number of H-coin we understood to be in circulation. We had ongoing questions as to how H-coin could have such a significant market capitalization.
And Mr. Roberts, did you ever receive satisfactory answers to those questions about H-coin and H-dollar?
I recall receiving responses and that some of them were not satisfactory to Bitgo.
The court said, could you explain what you mean by market capitalization?
The witness said, so I am referring to the aggregate value of a cryptocurrency.
Mr. Roberts, turning your focus to March of 2023, what, if anything, happened that month that was relevant to your investigation?
I recall becoming aware of an indictment that identified Gov't, the Himalaya exchange, and other parties that I was familiar with.
And after you became aware of that indictment, when, if ever, did you communicate again with the Himalaya exchange?
I recall having further communication with Himalaya exchange personnel. A few days to a few weeks after that, the date of that indictment.
Who requested that communication? Was it Bitgo or the exchange?
I recall it being Himalaya exchange who requested that meeting.
And who was on that call for the Himalaya exchange?
I recall several people, including Priya Patel, an individual Marios Mamzeris and some other Himalaya exchange people.
And was this a video call?
Yes.
Were you able to see the Himalaya exchange participants?
I recall. I don't recall if I could see any or not.
You said that Marios Mamzeris was on the call for the Himalaya exchange. What role did he have with the exchange, as you understood it?
I understood that Mr. Mamzeris was in a senior corporate position, such as Chief Operating Officer.
And what, if anything, did the exchange personnel say on this call about H-coin?
Mr. Skirrick said, same objection.
The court said, overruled. You may continue. These statements are not being offered for their truth. They're being offered for the impact on the listener. Go ahead.
I don't recall a substantive discussion about H-coin on this particular call.
On this call, what, if anything, did the exchange personnel say about H-dollar?
I don't recall any specific discussion about H-dollar.
Mr. Roberts, what did the exchange people talk about on this call?
I recall Himalaya Exchange personnel wanting to flag to us that there was an indictment against Miles Guai and the Himalaya Exchange.
And what, if anything, did they say to you on that call about Miles Guai?
I recall a discussion, an explanation along the lines of Miles Guai is innocent, nothing to hide. And things of that nature.
And who from the Himalaya Exchange was talking to you about Miles Guai on this call?
I recall the call mostly being participated in by Priya Patel.
And you said that on the January call Ms. Patel told you that Miles Guai had no financial connection to the exchange. What understanding, if anything, did you have about why she was telling you he was innocent?
I recall thinking that the indictment, as I understood it, allegedly tied Miles Guai to the Himalaya Exchange and that she was looking to address this information.
Mr. Roberts, did there come a time during your account review that you spoke with the FBI?
Yes.
And who initiated contact with the FBI?
I did.
And why did you reach out to the FBI?
Bitgo decided to reach out to the FBI to notify them that we had an account on our platform for the Himalaya Exchange and whether closing that account would impede their investigation.
And what, if anything, did the FBI direct you to do?
Nothing.
And before you testified today, did you meet with the government's lawyers?
Yes.
About how many times?
Approximately 5.
Mr. Horton said, Ms. Loftus, can you please show the witness what's been marked as Government Exhibit BR 212? And if you could scroll through it just towards the bottom. You could just drag it down to the bottom and then come up to the top, please. Thanks.
By Mr. Horton.
Mr. Roberts, is this an email between Bitgo and personnel at the Himalaya Exchange?
Yes.
Are you a participant on this email exchange?
I am not.
And when you were conducting your account review of the Himalaya Exchange in 2023, did you review the contents of this email exchange?
I recall reviewing aspects of this exchange.
Mr. Horton said, and Your Honor, the government offers Government Exhibit BR 212.
Mr. Skirek said, no objection.
The court said, it is admitted.
Government's Exhibit BR 212 received in evidence.
Mr. Horton said, now, Ms. Loftus, if you could publish it, and please navigate down to the email that's dated Friday, March 10, 2023, 12:22 p.m. It's a little bit more than halfway down the page. Sorry. There it is.
By Mr. Horton.
Mr. Roberts, this email says that, on Friday, March 10, 2023, Marios Mamzeris wrote, thanks for your quick reply. Please find the answers below. Just remind us, Mr. Roberts, who Marios Mamzeris is.
I understood Marios Mamzeris to be the COO of Himalaya Exchange.
Mr. Horton said, Ms. Loftus, if you can scroll down to the email immediately below that, please. And if you can get the content to the answer to question 4 on the screen, please. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Horton said, oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Loftus. You can scroll up so that the to, from date is visible. Mr. Roberts, who sent this email?
This was from a person called Can Unsel.
And what role did Can Unsel have at Bitgo?
Can was a customer success manager.
Mr. Horton said, and Ms. Loftus, if you could look at the third line of text here. It says, I'm getting some questions internally which are blocking our overall progress and need to ask your team's help to settling these inquiries. Do you know what it means? Questions internally?
I would take this as a reference to questions that Bitgo personnel have about the Himalaya Exchange.
There are 4 questions in the email below. And what role, if any, Mr. Roberts, did you have in developing these questions?
I recall contributing to the composition of these questions.
Taking a look at the first question, Mr. Roberts. Himalaya claims to keep 95% of their funds in cold storage. Was that claim true?
I recall, based on the information available to me about the Himalaya coin and Himalaya dollar. I questioned whether this was accurate or not.
And of the Himalaya exchange coins that were kept in Bitgo wallets, how many were in cold storage?
Himalaya's cold storage account was never funded. It had zero balance.
Looking at the second question, why is it that only collateralized HDO credits are backed and audited? Why does HDO need to exist if it cannot be withdrawn off platform? Why was Bitgo asking that question?
Around this time Himalaya Exchange had submitted a request to Bitgo that, for support of a cryptocurrency that I knew as Himalaya Euro.
And the second question in line 2. Why does HDO need to exist if it cannot be withdrawn off platform? Can you explain that to the jury? Why did the inability to withdraw it off the platform prompt Bitgo to ask why does it need to exist?
Because we had questions about the nature of Himalaya dollar and Himalaya coin. When it came to reviewing this third cryptocurrency, Himalaya Euro, we were attempting to do some due diligence to assess whether it was, eligible for us to support on that platform.
And Mr. Roberts, the fact that HDO cannot be withdrawn off platform. What's the connection between that part of the question and why does HDO need to exist?
Because of the reference to collateralized HDO credits. I take this to be something that likely exists on a private ledger that could be tracked on something that Himalaya Exchange controls and is privy to. My findings I recall at this time were if these collateralized HDO credits exist, what is the purpose of Himalaya dollar, if you've already got those, credit system in place?
And did you ever develop a satisfactory understanding of what the purpose was of Himalaya dollar?
Mr. Skirik said, objection.
The court said, whether he obtained an explanation to his satisfaction. Is that what you're asking?
Mr. Horton said, I can ask a different question, Your Honor. Was it relevant to your ultimate recommendation, the question you just mentioned? Whether HDO had a purpose?
I recall it being relevant.
And by the time you made your final recommendation, what understanding did you have about HDO's purpose?
I recall maintaining ongoing concerns as to the purpose and existence of HDO.
Looking at the first sentence of the answer to question 2 from the Himalaya Exchange, and it says, we are launching crypto capabilities soon for our coins. What understanding do you have about that answer?
Mr. Skirik said, objection. I recall that we had some questions and a discussion with Priya Patel on our first video call in January 2023 when we were trying to learn about the mechanics of their platform and that there was no ability for their customers to fund their accounts for the cryptocurrency transaction or withdraw cryptocurrency from their platform. I took this reference to suggest that they were looking to develop that capability, but it did not exist at that time.
And how did your understanding that the Himalaya Exchange did not have crypto capabilities in March of 2023 inform your ultimate recommendation?
Mr. Skirik said, objection.
The court said, overruled.
Mr. Roberts. The question was, how did your understanding that as of March 2023 the Himalaya Exchange did not have crypto capabilities? How did that inform your recommendation?
I recall that it was part of the contribution to our finding that their exchange seemed to be closed loop, operating kind of on a private ledger. Mr. Skirik said, objection to findings.
The court said, overruled. You may continue.
Sorry. Can you ask that again, please?
Yeah. Mr. Roberts. The question was, how did your understanding that as of March 2023 the Himalaya Exchange did not have crypto capabilities, how did your understanding of that inform your ultimate recommendation?
Due to the private ledger closed-loop system that I had developed an understanding of. This fed into one of the ongoing red flags that we had when we concluded our account review.
And Mr. Roberts, now just looking at question 4 briefly, it says, if only HDO credits can be used to purchase HCN, then what else is causing HCN's multi-billion market cap? Part of the answer is We have thousands of supporters globally, thus the success of HCN.
Mr. Skirik said, "Is there a question?"
The court said, "The question is coming."
The question is, we have thousands of supporters globally. Thus the success of HCN, what understanding, if any? Does that give you about what's causing HCN's multi-billion market cap, the question that Bitgo asked?
I recall not finding this sentence to be particularly relevant to that question.
Mr. Horton said, "You can take this one down, Ms. Loftus." Mr. Roberts, after you concluded your review of Himalaya Exchange, what recommendation did you ultimately make?
I recall recommending that the Himalaya Exchange's account and relationship with Bitgo be escalated and considered for termination.
And was the Himalaya Exchange ultimately terminated by Bitgo?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts, was there one reason or multiple reasons for your recommendation to terminate the relationship with the Himalaya Exchange?
For me, the primary reason is that we identified financial crime red flags and we did not receive or identify satisfactory information in order to mitigate those financial crime red flags.
Mr. Horton said, "Your Honor, could I just have one moment?"
The court said yes.
Mr. Horton said, "Thank you, Your Honor." Mr. Roberts, based on your review of the exchange, was H-Coin or H-Dollar, as you saw it, available anywhere else other than the Himalaya Exchange?
I recall after performing research that I did not identify another cryptocurrency exchange or platform that offered H-Coin or H-Dollar for trading.
Mr. Horton said, "No further questions, Your Honor."
The court said, "Cross-examination?"
Mr. Skirik said, "Thank you."
Cross-examination. By Mr. Skirik.
Good afternoon, Mr. Roberts. I just wanted to go back to an earlier part of your testimony. I believe you testified on direct a bit about your preparation for today. Do you recall that? I did. And in the process of preparing for today, did you review documents that were provided to you by the government? The government did not provide me with any documents. Okay. Did you review documents that your employer assembled for you? Yes. Okay. And just describe to me, how were those documents kept, if you would? Is there a system or systems that Bitgo uses to archive materials? Yes. Okay. Can you just describe that for me for a second? We use industry-standard databases and file storage systems. Okay. Did you use Salesforce? Yes. To log client communications or preserve client communications. That is one way to log and preserve client communications. Okay. And how about G Suite, was that another one? Can you clarify that a little bit? Sure. Did Bitgo use G Suite in order to preserve documents and records that ultimately you ended up reviewing in connection with your testimony? Is G Suite a reference to Google? I believe so. Yes. Bitgo uses systems and software provided by Google to maintain records. Okay. Okay. All right. Now I just want to ask you some general questions, if that's okay. You testified on direct about certain transactions that happened on the blockchain, right? I testified about blockchain transactions. Right. And then there's some transactions that can happen off the blockchain, right? Which you testified about. Yes. Okay. And transactions that occur on the blockchain are called on-chain transactions, right? I understand them to be referred to that. Okay. And those transactions are publicly visible on the blockchain. Yes. Okay. And when it comes to off-chain transactions, those transactions are not publicly visible, right? That is my understanding. Okay. And in Bitgo's work and line of work, it only really deals with on-chain transactions, right? Bitgo has some products and services that may interface with off-chain transactions. Okay. Well, as relevant here, for the Himalaya Exchange, Bitgo only provided on-chain transaction services, right? Yes. The wallet services Himalaya was utilizing pertains to on-chain transactions only. Okay. And are there some, when it comes to cryptocurrency exchanges? Is it possible to have off-chain transactions, in your experience at Bitgo? I am of the understanding that it is possible for cryptocurrency exchanges to have off-chain transactions. Okay. And you're familiar with the cryptocurrency exchange Coinbase? Yes. Okay. And Coinbase, would you consider that a centralized exchange? Yes. Okay. And based on your experience at Bitgo, does a centralized exchange conduct cryptocurrency transactions off-chain? Yes, that is my understanding. Okay. That's because they occur within a wallet. If I understand it correctly, and you'll tell me if I get it wrong. But, they occur within a wallet that belongs to the cryptocurrency exchange, right? Yes. And so viewed from the outside on the blockchain, one can't see what's happening inside that wallet. Right. If the transaction is off-chain, yes. Right. And thank you for that clarification. That's what I mean. A transaction that's off-chain, that's happening within the cryptocurrency exchange's wallet. That's not visible from the outside, that's all. Yes, that is my understanding. Okay. And in fact, Coinbase, as a centralized exchange, operates largely in that fashion, right?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
Mr. Skirek said, based on his experience.
Mr. Horton said, objection. He doesn't work for Coinbase. There's no foundation.
The court said, do you want to step up?
Continued on next page. At the sidebar,
Mr. Horton said, I objected because the questions are about Coinbase. Coinbase is a separate operation that has nothing to do with where Mr. Roberts works.
The court said, so the witness was asked about the subject matter of the trial, not about Coinbase.
Mr. Skirek said, well, I believe the witness was asked questions on direct about on-chain and off-chain transactions. And asked extensively about what he couldn't see happening inside the Himalaya exchange wallet. And so I'm drawing that parallel, Your Honor, to his understanding based on his experience at this company. Which is the foundation for his testimony about what happens at Coinbase as a point of comparison.
Mr. Horton said, the objection was just that there is no foundation for his knowledge about Coinbase.
The court said, all right, so you'll ask him whether he knows how Coinbase operates.
Mr. Skirek said, okay. I believe I asked a question close to that, but I'll firm it up, Your Honor. Thank you.
The interpreter said, Your Honor, the interpreter team is asking Your Honor. Requesting Your Honor to inform all parties to slow down the pace and pause, if possible. Thank you.
The court said, please yes everyone slow down.
Mr. Skirek said, understood. Thank you.
in open court.
The court said, all righty. So the questions and the answers please speak more slowly.
Mr. Skirek said, understood, Your Honor.
By Mr. Skirek.
So Mr. Roberts. I believe I asked you before about whether you have a general understanding of the way that Coinbase operates. I do. Okay. And you're familiar with the fact, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that Coinbase is a centralized exchange, right? I understand them to have centralized exchange service offerings. Okay. And so when Coinbase conducts a transaction on its centralized exchange, that transaction happens inside of a wallet that is on the blockchain, correct? It could. It could. Okay. And certainly there could be other transactions, to the point I think you're trying to make. That could happen on the blockchain where Coinbase is sending something out of its wallet, to be clear. Yes, that is my understanding. Okay. But in the main, when it conducts or executes a trade for clients, that transaction itself, happens inside its wallet. Assuming it's through the centralized exchange service offering. I'm not entirely aware of every type of product they have. But you're aware that it does have centralized exchange offerings. Yes. Okay. And again, really my principal question here is, in that case, viewed from the outside. Viewed from the perspective of the blockchain. One cannot see the transaction that's happening inside Coinbase wallet, right?
Mr. Horton said, Objection. Asked and answered.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
On the basis it's an off-chain transaction, a viewer of the blockchain would not be aware that that transaction took place. Okay. And so based on your review and understanding of the Himalaya exchange, would you agree that the Himalaya exchange was a centralized operation? Yes, I would agree with that. Okay. And therefore, one would not necessarily expect to be able to see from the blockchain all the transactions that were happening inside the Himalaya exchange's wallet.
Mr. Horton said, objection. Calls for speculation.
The court said, you may answer.
Sorry. Can you please repeat that again? Yeah. Mr. Skirrick said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to burden the court reporter, but could we have that read back?
Record read.
I would clarify that the transactions were not necessarily occurring in the wallet. But the transactions could be off-chain. Okay. So, fair enough. If, they may be in the wallet or they may be off-chain, but in either case, that wouldn't be something you could see from outside. Yes. Right. You would need the records of the exchange itself to be able to tell what transactions were happening inside that wallet. Right. Yes. Okay. And that wasn't something that you had access to, obviously. Given limitations on information available to you, Bitgo did not have internal Himalaya transactions available to us. Okay.
The court said, so your question was, that would be something you could not see, is that correct?
Mr. Skirrick said, I believe that was my question, Your Honor.
The court said, okay.
Mr. Skirrick said, yes.
The court said, I just wanted to clarify that, because the transcription did not include a not.
Mr. Skirrick said, okay. Thank you.
The court said, you may continue.
By Mr. Skirrick.
Okay. Now you testified on direct that Bitgo offers a couple of different products by way of wallets. Right. Yes. Okay. It offers, I think, what you called a hot wallet, right? Yes. Okay. And can you just describe a hot wallet for the jury, please? I understand a hot wallet is a cryptocurrency wallet that is connected to the internet. And another one of the offerings from Bitgo is a custodial wallet, right? Yes. Okay. And what's the difference between a custodial wallet and a hot wallet? On the Bitgo platform, our hot wallet offerings are non-custodial. So the user of the hot wallet maintains control. Okay. And is it fair to say that there are a number of Bitgo's clients who use only one kind of wallet or the other? I've seen Bitgo customers use one or the other previously, yes. Okay. So there's nothing sort of on its face unusual about a client using only hot wallet services, for example. That could be typical. Okay. Now let's just talk for a second about, again. This is based on your experience at Bitgo, when you have a cryptocurrency token that is on the blockchain. Can anyone look that up to confirm that it's on the blockchain? Sorry. Can you repeat that, please? Sure. When you have a cryptocurrency token on a public blockchain, can anyone look it up to confirm that it's on the public blockchain?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor. Is this about what was in the scope of Mr. Roberts's review?
Mr. Skirrick said, Your Honor. I believe Mr. Roberts testified that he looked up both of the cryptocurrencies at issue to see that they were on the blockchain. That's what I'm getting at.
The court said, you may answer.
Yes. If a cryptocurrency is on the blockchain, on a public blockchain. My understanding is that a viewer of that blockchain should be able to see that cryptocurrency. Okay. And for those of us who aren't fully initiated in the crypto world, how do you go about doing that? We can use a block explorer, which is publicly accessible through the internet. And at Bitgo, we can use internal systems or software provided by vendors. Okay. And is there something called Etherscan that you're familiar with? Yes. Okay. And could someone use Etherscan to do the lookup we were just talking about? Yes. Okay. And are you, Is one able to see the code that is associated with the individual wallet on using the tools that you just described? You can obtain information about individual wallets on the Etherscan. Okay. And can you do the same thing with respect to cryptocurrency tokens? Yes. Okay. And is that in fact part of what Bitgo does when it conducts due diligence on prospective customers or current customers? It is a step we may take. Okay. And is it in fact, if you know, a step that was taken when it comes to HCN? Can you clarify if you're referring to the 2021 review or 2022 review? Sure. Well, let's take them piece by piece. Do you know whether that was part of the diligence that was conducted in 2021? I recall performing searches to understand its state. And I understood that it was yet to be launched or available. Okay. And then because we have a couple of cryptocurrencies at issue, I'm just going to go one by one. So when it comes to HCN, for the later period of time, was there a check conducted at that point? On Etherscan? Or equivalent? Yes. I recall referring to block explorers and performing searches. Okay. And at that point, withdrawn. Approximately when was that review that you just referred to? It was initiated in the fall of 2022. Okay. So in the fall of 2022 when you looked up HCN on the blockchain, did you find it? I recall finding information I was looking for. Okay. And when you say the information you were looking for, you found the token on the blockchain? Yes. Okay. And now let's do the same set of questions with respect to HDO. So in 2021 did you look up HDO on the blockchain using any of the tools that you described? Yes, I recall performing the similar review to what I did with HCN with respect to HDO. Okay. And what did you find? I also found that it appeared to be in a, pre-launch or yet to be active state. Okay. Thanks. And then with respect to the fall of 2022. Did you conduct the same review when it comes to HDO? Yes. Okay. And what did you find? That when I went on Etherscan or its equivalent. That I found information about that cryptocurrency token. And that it was on the blockchain, it existed on the blockchain. Yes. Okay. Now the first time that you conducted diligence concerning the Himalaya exchange, I'm sorry. Withdrawn. I believe you testified on direct that the first time you conducted diligence with respect to the Himalaya exchange was in April of 2021. Or thereabouts. The diligence was focused on the cryptocurrencies Himalaya dollar and Himalaya coin. However, I recall considering Himalaya exchange because of their connection. Okay. And that was part of an onboarding process with Bitgo, is that fair to say? This review was specific to the request to onboard Himalaya dollar and Himalaya coin. Okay. And in addition to onboarding Himalaya dollar and Himalaya coin, withdrawn. When you say onboarding Himalaya dollar and Himalaya coin, you mean that Bitgo is going to provide the wallet services for Himalaya dollar and Himalaya coin, right? Am I correct in that understanding? Yes. It's the ability for Bitgo wallets to receive, hold, and send those cryptocurrencies in Bitgo wallets. Okay. And if you could just briefly describe for us what the steps are in terms of the diligence that's conducted as part of that onboarding process. Can you clarify if it's specific to my review or the wider diligence process? Why don't we just talk about the wider diligence process? And then I may ask you more specifically about your review. Sure. The wider diligence process is, my understanding is that it is seeking to understand the background, the composition, the purpose of a cryptocurrency. Okay. And then when it comes to your review, could you also please explain that process? Yes. My review is specific to performing an anti-money laundering due diligence review. I understand this process to refer to researching the cryptocurrencies to see if there are any financial crime red flags. Okay. And as part of that financial crime red flag analysis, did someone at Bitgo, to your knowledge, analyze the code for HCN and HDO? I do not recall performing a code analysis in connection with the anti-money laundering due diligence review. Okay. Do you know whether some other part of Bitgo did that, someone else at Bitgo did that? I do not specifically recall whether that took place or not. Okay. Now am I correct in assuming that as part of this April 2021 onboarding process that the Himalaya Exchange provided a variety of information to Bitgo for its evaluation? Are you talking about the consideration of opening an account for Himalaya Exchange on the Bitgo platform? Yes. Fair enough. You've drawn a distinction between the tokens and the exchange, and I dropped that. So yes, my question is, when it comes to onboarding those tokens, did the exchange representatives provide Bitgo with information for its evaluation? I recall references to white paper. White papers for the Himalaya dollar, and Himalaya coin, so yes, I recall them submitting information. Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Okay. And then did you and your team have access to those materials? I don't. I recall that I had access to it in some way. Whether it was going to the Himalaya website or internally. Okay. But either way, you recall having access to it, including the white paper. Yes. Okay. So let me just show that to you briefly. Mr. Skirik said, if we could please bring up Government Exhibit BR 190, just for the parties and the witness. Are you able to see that on your screen? Yes. Okay. And do you recognize that document? Yes. Okay. And do you recognize it as the Himalaya Dollar White Paper version 1.0 dated April 2021? Yes. Mr. Skirik said, okay. Defense moves, I'm sorry. I didn't give it a number. Oh, no, I did give it a number. Apologies. So we move Government Exhibit BR 190 into evidence.
Mr. Horton said, objection, hearsay.
The court said, would you step up?
At the sidebar,
The court said, so this is a document prepared by Himalaya Exchange?
Mr. Skirik said, yes.
The court said, and how does it come in?
Mr. Skirik said, so it's one of the materials. One of the many materials that he reviewed at the time and relied on as part of his work at Bitgo, and you know, Your Honor. We're going to take him through it to ask him if he saw certain things in it at the time and if he remembers those things.
The court said, so you're offering it for the truth?
Mr. Skirik said, it's not being offered for the truth.
Mr. Horton said, we disagree with that, Your Honor. We think it's...
Mr. Kamaraju said, I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you.
Mr. Horton said, we disagree with that. We think the purpose of walking through these Himalaya Exchange out-of-court statements is to show the jury that Himalaya Exchange was saying things and implying that it's true.
Mr. Kamaraju said, that's not the purpose of it, and also, the government just did this exact same thing on direct. Where they introduced the auditor's report of Armanino on the basis it was a document this witness relied on. So this is a Himalaya Exchange marketing material. We're not offering it for the truth but merely offering it for the fact that this is what Himalaya Exchange was saying about its product. Which is, frankly, a central issue in the case. So I don't know.
The court said, they're entitled to a defense. I'm going to let it in.
Mr. Finkel said, Your Honor, if we may, if Your Honor lets it in, the government requests a limiting instruction. To instruct the jury that these documents are not offered for the truth of those statements. It's offered for the effect on the listener.
Ms. Shrofa said, then the limiting instruction should include the prior document that the government introduced on direct.
The court said, you didn't ask for a limiting instruction.
Ms. Shrofa said, we didn't, Your Honor.
The court said so.
Mr. Finkel said, if you want to say that the Armanino document is false, that's fine.
Continued on next page. In open court.
Mr. Skirik said, so we move the document.
The court said, members of the jury, this document is not being offered for the truth of what's being stated in that document, only for its effect on the witness. Let's go. It's admitted.
Government's Exhibit BR 190 received in evidence. By Mr. Skirek.
Okay. So as we covered before, you recognize this as the Himalaya Dollar White Paper from April of 2021, right? Yes. Mr. Skirek said, okay. And if we could please scroll to, I believe it's page 10. I apologize. It's page 9 of the PDF. 7 of the document, if that helps. Okay. Now do you see in the middle of the page paragraph beginning, if the market for HDO credits? I do. Okay. You see, it says, if the market for HDO credits experiences significant liquidity shortfall, the issuer will have the ability to use funds in the reserve to provide liquidity support. Yes. Mr. Skirek said, okay. And if we could now just go to the next page, please. And if we could highlight that first arrow. So to speak, that's marked 01. And now before I ask you about this, Mr. Roberts. I believe you testified earlier that at the point in time, April 2021. Your understanding was that the exchange and the tokens were at a pre-launch stage, right? Yes. And so that is, they were not operating yet, they were still being built. Yes. Okay. And so if we can then just look at point 1 here, it says, the Himalaya Exchange pre-launch and launch of HDO. Private placement participants may apply to open a Himalaya Exchange account and complete KYC procedures. Following opening of an account, private placement participants may top up their account by purchasing Himalaya dollar credits with USD on a 1-to-1 ratio, right? Yes. Now do you recall that at the time of your initial evaluation of the tokens that the exchange informed Bitgo that HDO was based on a credit system? I do not recall a notification that I was aware of.
Does looking at this document refresh your recollection that Himalaya Exchange made that disclosure?
Looking at this, I recognize broadly the content in the document.
Okay. Does it refresh your memory that that was something that was disclosed to Bitgo at the time?
I don't recall it being disclosed to Bitgo, like, by a person.
Well, it can be. Disclosures can happen lots of different ways, right? You can have a disclosure that comes through a document, right?
It could.
And you testified earlier that this document was among the documents that Bitgo reviewed in April of 2021 in connection with onboarding the tokens. Right.
Yes.
Okay. So is it fair to say that the credit system for HDO was disclosed to Bitgo back in April of 2021?
Yes.
Mr. Skirek said, okay. If we could go back to the previous page just for a moment. It's the third paragraph up from the bottom beginning, in addition. If we could blow that up, please. Okay. The document says, in addition to the trading solution benefits, HDO credits are also designed for use through the Himalaya Pay app. The Himalaya Pay app, which will be launched during Phase 3, will allow members to use HDO credits to offer domestic and cross-border payments to merchants who accept payment for goods or services through Himalaya Pay within the Himalaya ecosystem, Members will also be able to make transfers of HDO credits from their Himalaya Pay account to the Himalaya Pay accounts of other members. Did I read that right?
Yes.
Okay. Does this, withdrawn? Do you recall that in April of 2021, the Himalaya Exchange disclosed to Bitgo that HDO credits were part of an overall plan to also have a payment app?
I recall seeing this reference to Himalaya Pay app.
Okay. And what do you understand the Himalaya Pay app to be a reference to?
I recall that Himalaya was looking at a better product along the lines of payments.
And payments, to your understanding, would mean that either HDO credits or HDO would be moving on the Himalaya platform, right?
Yes.
It says, within the Himalaya ecosystem, right?
It does.
Right. And just, again, to return to the earlier conversation we had, that would be something that was not visible to Bitgo from the outside, right?
Yes, I would take that to be an off-chain movement.
Okay. And then the last sentence there, saying, members will also be able to, you see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Do you understand that to mean that users will be able to transfer HDO credits between and among themselves, separate and apart from using a payment system? I took this to mean that HDO credits could move from one Himalaya Pay account to the other. And one user to another within a single wallet, right? Yes, within the platform or ecosystem of Himalaya, which was housed in that one wallet, to your understanding. I'm not sure if I would say it was necessarily housed in the wallet, but an off-chain system. Okay. Fair enough. That's a fair point. So in an off-chain system in a way that would not be visible from the outside, whether it was that wallet or some other wallet. Yes. Okay. Mr. Skirik said, okay. Can we please go to page of the document 1113 of the PDF? And we're just going to highlight exchange of HDO credits. Okay. So here it says, exchange of HDO credits. A member may make a request to the Himalaya Exchange to exchange HDO credits for an equivalent amount in US dollars. Where the Himalaya Exchange accepts such a request, it will accept a transfer of such HDO credits in exchange for an equivalent amount in US dollars from the reserve to be paid to the bank account of the member. The issuer is not obliged to provide liquidity support, and the Himalaya Exchange is not obliged to agree to any request from a member to exchange HDO credits for US dollars, and such actions are at the sole discretion of the issuer and the Himalaya Exchange respectively. Members do not have any direct or indirect claim on the issuer or the reserve. Now do you understand the second paragraph here to mean that that the exchange was disclosing that there was no guarantee that it would be able to provide HDO holders with US dollars at the time of redemption? Necessarily.
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
Mr. Skirik said, asking for his understanding.
Mr. Horton said, it's testimony.
The court said you need to break this down.
Mr. Skirik said, okay. Let's actually start with the first paragraph. In the first paragraph, do you understand that the exchange is disclosing here that it will exchange HDO credits for US dollars from the reserve that it has? Yes. Okay. And in the second paragraph, do you understand the exchange to be saying that there is no guarantee that it will be able to do that upon demand and that it will happen at its discretion? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Skirik said, could we please just go back to, briefly, page 10 of the PDF, page 8 of document. I'm sorry. The one that we were looking at before. I may have the wrong page number. But the one that we were looking at before with the arrows entitled Rollout. I think there it is. Great. Thank you. And if we could just zoom in on the arrows a little bit. Great. Thanks.
By Mr. Skirik.
So do you see here a bit of a flow chart of the various phases of the rollout of the Himalaya Exchange and its proposed services? Yes. Okay. And we read before the first arrow there about pre-launch and launch of HDO, right? We did. Okay. And that's just phase 1, right? That is my understanding. Okay. And then phase 2 is the launch of the Himalaya coin, right? Yes. And that's HCN, as we've been referring to it. Yes, that is my understanding. Okay. And then phase 3 is the launch of the Himalaya Pay app, you see that? I do. And what's called the full Himalaya Exchange? I do. And underneath that it says, members may commence trading HDO, HCN, and other crypto asset credits through their account. Yes, I can see that. Okay. And finally, the fourth arrow says Himalaya Exchange app launch. Do you see that? Yes, I do. Okay. And so does this. Is it fair to say that this lays out several phases of the rollout of the Himalaya Exchange that were?
Mr. Horton said, objection to relevance.
That were planned over time.
The court said sorry. Are you asking him whether the document states that?
Mr. Skirik said, it is his understanding that this explains the rollout of various services that Himalaya Exchange intended to provide over time.
The court said, so the document speaks for itself.
Mr. Skirik said, I'm just looking for the witness's understanding, Your Honor, on this.
The court said, If the question is what does it say, that's one thing. You're asking him whether he understands that that is what it says?
Mr. Skirek said, I'm asking if that's his understanding of the document, of what is disclosed here.
The court said, okay. I don't understand the question.
Mr. Skirek said, okay.
By Mr. Skirek.
Did you understand, based on the materials we just looked at, that there was going to be a phased rollout of different services by the Himalaya Exchange?
Mr. Horton said, objection, Your Honor.
Mr. Skirek said, that's okay. I'll move on, Your Honor. That's fine.
By Mr. Skirek.
Okay. Now none of what you reviewed in this document at the time was a red flag for Bitgo, right? Yes. We did not find any red flags at that time. Okay. All right. Now you were asked some questions earlier about Bitgo's investigation. Internal investigation, is that right? I'm sorry. Withdrawn. You were asked some questions earlier about an investigation that Bitgo started after receiving a subpoena from the government. Right. Yes. Okay. And did Bitgo receive that request from the prosecutors in this case? I recall that subpoena was received from one of them. Okay. And that prior to that, did Bitgo have any concerns regarding the exchange? I do not recall having any concerns regarding the exchange. Okay. And the exchange, I'm sorry. Bitgo hadn't received any complaints about the exchange. To your knowledge? I do not recall becoming aware of any complaints about the exchange prior to the receipt of the subpoena. And that was about 18 months in between the April 2021 onboarding and when you received the subpoena, right? Yes, approximately. Okay. Now you were asked on direct whether the government required Bitgo to conduct the account review. Do you recall that? I recall being asked that question. Okay. And you said, and your answer was no, right? Yes. Okay. And is it Bitgo's policy to conduct an account review if it receives a subpoena from the government? It is a typical procedure that we follow when we receive a subpoena. Okay. And I believe you testified that when you started that account review, you found some things. Found additional information that was not available to you at the time you conducted the initial due diligence in April 2021. Right. Yes. Okay. And among those things were the subsequent white papers for HCN and HDO. I can't recall if they were different white papers. Okay. But you found whatever white papers existed at that time and reviewed those as part of your account review, right? Yes. We identified the white paper material and reviewed it. Okay. And if there were a more recent white paper, you would have reviewed that, right? That would have been your practice. On the basis that what was available to me, yes. Okay. Now I think you also testified that you believed that you found that it was publicly available information that there were 1.5 billion HDO. Is that right? In that ballpark. I don't recall the specific number. Okay. Fair enough. Approximately 1.5 billion HDO. Approximately. Around, in that range. Okay. And at the time that you were conducting this account review, there wasn't anything that you found that indicated that the Himalaya Exchange wasn't still in the early stage of development. Right. I don't recall making a finding that they were still in development. Do you recall that finding the existence of HPay, for example, at the time? I recall reviewing their website, and I don't recall a specific reference to HPay. Okay. Did you have any reason to believe that the exchange wasn't still in its early stages of development in the fall of 2022? I did not. Okay. Now you testified earlier that there were a number of things that you believe you found that were quote-unquote red flags. Right. Yes. Okay. And one of those I think you testified was that there was a significant increase in the price of HCN. Yes. Okay. And you said that you observed reports about the increase in the price of HCN. Was that from the internet? Yes. From Google searches, that kind of thing? Yes. Okay. Now, based on your experience at Bitgo, is it sometimes the case that there are bubbles in the prices of digital assets? Can you clarify the term bubble?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "So what does bubble mean?"
Mr. Skirek said, "A sharp run-up in the prices of assets that later deflate to some extent."
The court said, "You're asking whether he's observed that as part of his job?"
Mr. Skirek said, "Correct."
The court said, "You may answer."
I recall observing fluctuating prices of cryptocurrencies over time. And that's something of a feature of the cryptocurrency space, right?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor." Goes beyond the scope of the investigation.
The court said, "You can answer."
My understanding is that cryptocurrencies typically have a fluctuating value. Right. And they can be volatile, right? Their price could go up and down, absolutely. Okay. And are you familiar with the term irrational exuberance?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "Sustained. Sustained. Now we're getting far afield."
Okay. You also testified that another of the red flags that you believed you observed was that there was a concentration of ownership of the digital assets. Right. Yes. Okay. And as we talked about a little while ago with respect to the centralized nature of the Himalaya exchange, withdrawn. We talked earlier about the centralized nature of the Himalaya exchange, right? Yes. Okay. And because it was centralized, wouldn't you expect to see all of the assets in a concentrated fashion with the exchange? I would not necessarily expect to see nearly 100% of a cryptocurrency in a single wallet. But in fact, you would expect to see high concentrations, right?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection." Asked and answered.
The court said, "Sustained."
Mr. Skirek said, "I believe he testified he wouldn't necessarily expect to see that." So my follow-up question is to understand that necessarily part of the answer.
Mr. Horton said, "Same objection."
The court said, "His answer was not necessarily."
By Mr. Skirek.
Okay. Regardless of concentration, you wouldn't expect, with a centralized exchange like Himalaya, you wouldn't expect to see a large number of on-chain transactions, is that fair to say? Sorry. Can you repeat that? Sure. With a centralized exchange like Himalaya, you wouldn't necessarily expect to see a large number of on-chain transactions, right? With centralized exchanges, I typically expect to see inbound on-chain transactions and outbound on-chain transactions, which would correspond to customers' deposits and customers' withdrawals. But we just reviewed, didn't we, that the only way to purchase HDO credits was by depositing fiat with the exchange, right? We saw that in the April 2021 white paper.
Mr. Horton said, "Objection." It was just reviewed, as the question indicated.
The court said, "Are you asking him is that what was stated in the document? Is that your question?"
Mr. Skirek said, "I believe he answered that he would expect to see inbound or outbound transactions." And I'm referring back to the April 2021 white paper that we just reviewed that indicates that the purchase of HDO credits happens by depositing US dollars, fiat currency, with the exchange.
Mr. Horton said, "Your Honor, in view of that explanation, we renew our objection from our discussion at the sidebar of the purpose of that."
The court said, "Having reviewed that statement, what is your question?"
Mr. Skirek said, "The question is, does he recall that is how funds get into the exchange? According to the white paper, according to the..."
The court said, "So you're asking whether the white paper states that?"
Mr. Skirek said, "No. I'm asking whether it explains the lack of inbound cryptocurrency transactions because the white paper said the only way you can get HDO credits on the system is to deposit cash."
The court said, "You can answer that question."
Sorry. Can you just restate that? There was a bit of back and forth. Please. Thank you.
Mr. Horton said, "Your Honor, may we approach before the question is asked again?"
The court said yes.
At the sidebar.
The court said, "So I understand you to be asking him whether his conclusion about inbound and outbound is consistent with what's in the white paper. Am I correct?"
Mr. Skirik said, broadly speaking, yes. But I think, Your Honor, the point is, on direct. He was shown a variety of materials that were Himalaya Exchange materials. And asked, and they were allowed to show him, the government was allowed to show them for the effect on the listener because it informed his ultimate conclusions. And I'm showing him the same materials to challenge his judgment on that.
The court said, so that's fine, but it seems like perhaps you should phrase the question. Isn't it true that if X then Y?
Mr. Skirik said, okay. I will try.
Mr. Horton said, our objection to framing it the way he should frame it is that, isn't it true that the substance of the Himalaya Exchange white paper is offering it for its truth? And taking it for granted that it is true. Well, since this is true, how do you react to that? And that's the purpose that we objected to at the sidebar.
Mr. Skirik said, we are not offering it for its truth. It's the same basis you offered it. For the effect on the listener, and it informs his judgment. I'm asking him the same thing. Does this inform your judgment? Does this make you think differently about?
Mr. Kamraju said, it's no different than saying, you read this document, you reached a conclusion. Does this part of the document undermine the conclusion that you reached?
Mr. Finkel said, but that's not the question that was posed.
Mr. Kamraju said, that's the question that Your Honor.
Mr. Finkel said, excuse me.
Mr. Kamraju said, I apologize.
Mr. Finkel said, the question that was posed was, the white paper said this, so you'd expect to see X. Which is using the white paper for its truth. Mr. Skirik is right. If he wants to ask a question of what effect did the white paper statement have on him, that's a fair question. To the extent he poses the question, Mr. Skirik poses the question that he did. We ask that Your Honor give a limiting instruction. Just because the white paper says this fact doesn't make it true. And it is not being offered for its truth. And to be clear, the government's view is the white paper is false. So that's the issue that we're wrestling with.
Mr. Kamraju said, well, to the extent the government's view is the white paper is false. They'll obviously have the opportunity to put on evidence and argue that in summation.
Mr. Finkel said, we're still allowed to.
Mr. Kamraju said, sorry. I interrupted you and I apologized, and I'd ask for the same thing. My point is, the way the document, the way it is posed is, this is the material you reviewed. This part of the material undermines the conclusion that you reached, correct? That's all about what's in his mind.
Mr. Finkel said, that wasn't the question asked. And to the extent that the question is, relying on the information in the white paper. We ask that Your Honor give a limiting instruction which I think is consistent with what defense counsel says he's using the white paper for, which is the effect on the listener and his interpretation of that relating to his analysis of HEO.
The court said, I think he can ask whether this statement is consistent with his conclusion.
Mr. Skirik said, I'm happy to put it like that.
Mr. Finkel said, I think that's a fair question, Your Honor. And I would just ask that the limiting instruction accompany it, because just so the jury isn't confused. Because what's being offered for its truth and not, to a lay juror sometimes can be misunderstood. And so we just ask that the limiting instruction be provided so that it is being viewed by the jury, and considered by the jury for the proper purpose that the court has allowed this information to come in for. That's the government's view.
Mr. Kamraju said, I don't think the court has to repeat the same limiting instruction at each reference to the document.
The court said, I agree with that. Okay.
Continued on next page. In open court.
Mr. Skirik said, okay. Thank you.
By Mr. Skirik.
So Mr. Roberts, returning to this discussion. You recall looking at the portion of the April 2021 white paper that described how any stored value would get onto the Himalaya Exchange. Right. I recall reviewing sentences about the mechanics of funding accounts on the exchange. Right. The mechanics of funding in HDO, the purchase of HDO. Yes. Okay. And according to the white paper, that is done by sending fiat, or US dollars. To use a less fancy phrase, to the exchange, and then the exchange in turn would issue an HDO credit to the purchaser. Is that fair? Yes, I recall reading that. Okay. And so my question is, in light of that, is that inconsistent with the idea that it would be strange not to see inbound cryptocurrency transactions?
Mr. Horton said, object to the form.
The court said you can answer.
Are you talking specifically about this cryptocurrency exchange or cryptocurrency exchanges generally? No, just this one, given it's unique. Well, that is how they described the mechanics of their exchange. Right. And so that is how they described it. And that would explain why one might not see inbound cryptocurrency transfers to the exchange, right?
Mr. Horton said, objection in view of the issues raised at the sidebar, Your Honor.
The court said, you can ask whether or not this claim is consistent with his conclusions about inbound and outbound transactions.
Mr. Skirek said, that was going to be the next question, Your Honor.
By Mr. Skirek.
And is that method of funding somewhat inconsistent with your conclusion that you would expect to see inbound cryptocurrency transactions? I thought I said for inbound and outbound that I recall referring to cryptocurrency exchanges more generally. Not necessarily the Himalaya exchange. And I agree. You did. And what we're talking about, just to be clear, is, with respect to the Himalaya exchange specifically, given the way that it was described to you, right? And the way it was disclosed to Bitgo, is that, to a degree, inconsistent with the idea, which you testified to earlier, that you would expect, with respect to Himalaya, to see inbound cryptocurrency exchanges?
Mr. Horton said, objection. It's a compound question with testimony.
The court said, overruled. Overruled. You may answer.
I don't think that's inconsistent with my finding. And it's not inconsistent with your finding. You think that there should still be, with respect to the Himalaya exchange, specifically, your expectation would still be to see inbound cryptocurrency exchanges, given the way that it works.
Mr. Horton said, objection. Asked and answered.
The court said, so he just answered the question.
Mr. Skirek said, okay. Now you also testified that one of the red flags that you identified in your review related to HDO's reserves. Right. Yes. And I think you said that you expected that the amount of HDO tokens in circulation should match the reserves that are, let's call it, in the bank. If that's fair, from your point of view. Yes. Okay. And just what are reserves again, to remind everyone? My understanding of reserves, it is the pot of money or asset that gives value to the stablecoin. Okay. And you testified that you believe that the amount of HDO that was minted was 1.5 billion. Approximately. In a ballpark range. I don't recall the specific number. Okay. Fair. And I think you also testified on direct that minted essentially means created. Is that fair? I'd agree with that, yes. Okay. Now isn't it possible, based on your experience, that you could have tokens that are created or minted, but held out of circulation?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Calls for speculation.
Mr. Skirek said, based on his experience.
The court said, I'm going to permit the question. You may answer.
I think that it is possible to mint tokens but withhold them from circulation. Okay. And so that means that only a portion of what was minted could be circulating out and in an ecosystem or on the blockchain. Fair? It's possible. Okay. And so turning to the case of the Himalaya exchange specifically. If 1.5 billion were minted but some were withheld from circulation, then you wouldn't expect to see reserves for the full 1.5 billion, fair? For me, when I viewed this information, it was impossible for me to determine what was in circulation and what was not in circulation. And yes, agreed 100% because you didn't have access to the information as to what was going on inside the Himalaya exchange. Right. I did not. Right. So you had no way of knowing whether 1.5 billion had been minted but some were held back out of circulation. I did not have access to that internal information, to the extent that it exists. Fair enough. Okay. And again, you can't see this because, viewed from the outside. Looking at the blockchain, all the HDO looks like it's in, either one or a set of wallets that belong to the exchange, right? Yes. Okay. So based on this, it's difficult to know what the right reserve level is or would have been. Right.
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, based on what?
Mr. Skirek said, based on the discussion that the witness and I just had, the question is. It's difficult to know from the outside what the appropriate reserve level is.
Mr. Horton said, same objection.
The court said, the appropriate reserve level? Is that a term of art?
Mr. Skirek said, I believe the witness testified that only tokens in circulation need to have reserves. And because we can't tell from the outside what's in circulation, there's no way to know what the appropriate reserve is.
Mr. Horton said, objection. That mischaracterizes his testimony.
The court said, I don't recall the witness saying that.
Mr. Skirek said, Your Honor, may we have a brief sidebar?
The court said yes.
Testimony reviewed at the sidebar.
The court said, go ahead.
Mr. Skirek said, thank you, Your Honor.
By Mr. Skirek.
So just to go back briefly, I believe you testified earlier, just to be clear, that the amount of reserves should match the amount of a token that's in circulation, right? Yes. Okay. And so if you don't know what the amount of a token is in circulation, then you can't determine what the right reserve amount should be, right? Yes, but I can refer to information on the blockchain to get an idea of what may be in circulation. Right. But if we're talking about tokens that are held off-chain, then there's no way to know what the right reserve figure should be, right? If it was held off-chain, then it's entirely possible that a person in the public could not ascertain those details. Right. Because you just don't have the information. Yes. That's fine, right? Okay. Mr. Skirek said, now if we could please turn to Government Exhibit in Evidence 208A. Now do you recall reviewing this document on direct testimony with Mr. Horton? Yes. Mr. Skirek said, and if we could go to page 2, please. Okay. And you recall that Mr. Horton asked you some questions? Mr. Skirek said, yes, thanks. Let's zoom in on the top portion of the document. Okay. Now I believe you said on direct that reviewing this information led you to believe that there was an internal ledger system at Himalaya. Right. I got the impression that one likely existed based on this information. Right. And we covered that when you and I spoke a little earlier today. That, to the extent the system operated off-chain, that it was an internal ledger system.
Mr. Horton said, objection. Asked and answered.
The court said, you may answer.
Yes. Okay. Now if we look at do you see the heading, Total HDO Denominated Liabilities Issued? Yes, I do. Okay. And then right under that, it says, Collateralized HDO Tokens on the Ethereum Blockchain. Yes, I can see that. And there's the zero there that you talked about with Mr. Horton, right? Yes. Okay. And does that mean, is my understanding correct that means that there are no backed HDO tokens on the Ethereum blockchain? That is a finding that I have made, yes. Okay. And then if we look at the next line. Collateralized HDO credits on the Himalaya ecosystem platform. Yes. Do you see that? I do. And there, your understanding was that that's a reference to the off-chain system that Himalaya has. Right. That is the impression I obtained. Okay. And it shows there that the HDO credits were backed at that roughly $400 million figure. Is that right? It shows that there are, roughly $400 million there. Okay. And that's the credits that are backed. When we say credits, we're talking about the off-chain tokens, right? Yes. The representation of the off-chain tokens, right? Yes. Okay. And that $400 million number, now let's go up to the top where it says, US dollars held in Himalaya-owned bank account. Do you see that? Yes. All right. And does that number exceed the $4 million, approximately $4 million number below it? It does. Okay. And does that suggest to you that for the HDO credits that are off-chain, that those HDO credits are adequately backed by cash reserves? It is certainly an attestation that that could be the case. Okay. Do you have any reason to believe otherwise? Not at this time. Mr. Skirek said, Your Honor, if I could just have one moment.
The court said, okay.
Mr. Skirek said, Thank you, Your Honor. Now I think you testified earlier that you were told by someone at the exchange in 2023 that Mr. Gov't wasn't financially involved in the platform. Is that right? I recall receiving that type of response, yes. Okay. And did you develop any information in your investigation that was inconsistent with that? Well, I recall identifying information in the public domain, such as Google searches, that drew a potential financial connection between Miles Gov't and the Himalaya exchange. Okay. And you've never spoken to Miles Gov't before, right? Not to my knowledge. And to your knowledge, has Miles Gov't ever contacted Bitgo? I'm not aware of an attempt by Miles Gov't to contact Bitgo. Okay. And as far as you know, all of the instructions that were given to Bitgo on behalf of the exchange were given by representatives of the exchange. Fair to say? Yes. Okay. And, okay. Fair enough. Now you said that you received the subpoena from the government in the fall of 2020, right? Fall of 2022. I'm missing 2 years. Yes. Thank you. Fall of 2022. And then Bitgo subsequently ended its relationship with the exchange, right? Subsequently, yes. And do you remember about when that was? Approximately mid-2023. Okay. June 8th sound like about the right date. I can't recall the specific date right now, but in the ballpark. Okay. So several months later. Yes. More than 6 months later. Yes. Okay. And do you recall that during that time, as part of your customer review process, you took into account media coverage of the Himalaya exchange? By media coverage, can you clarify that a little bit, please? Sure. I mean, as part of deciding whether or not to end your relationship with the exchange, Bitgo took into account the media coverage that the exchange was receiving, right? We took into account information available in the public domain, such as media websites that identified the Himalaya exchange. Right. And you also took into account that Mr. Gov't had been arrested, right? Yes. Okay. And in fact, you told the representatives of the exchange that Mr. Gov't being arrested and receipt of the grand jury subpoena were pretty much going to be the end of the relationship with Bitgo. Right. I don't recall that specific information being shared. Okay. Well, is it fair to say that bad media, withdrawn? Fair to say that adverse media coverage of a client, or bad press, as we would say, is something that you take into account? It is. Right. Because there's a reputational risk, right, for Bitgo. There is. Yeah. In being associated with, providing services to a customer that is getting bad press, right? Yes, we can take into account reputational harm matters. And sometimes if there's a lot of, heat on a customer, it may just not be worth it for Bitgo to continue doing business with them, right? That is a factor among others when assessing if having a relationship with a customer exceeds our risk tolerance. Right. And so do you recall approximately what the fees were that Bitgo was receiving from Himalaya? I recall the fee was in the range of, for all services, in the range of $10,000 to $15,000. I can't recall the exact figure. Okay. So it may not be worth the $10,000 or $15,000 in revenue to have the reputational risk of being associated with someone who's getting bad press. Right. It's a totality of factors that we consider when making that evaluation. The fees paid could certainly be a factor. Sure. But it's an important factor, right?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, you may answer whether it's an important factor.
It's a factor as important as many others. Okay. But it's important, right?
Mr. Horton said, objection. Asked and answered.
The court said, sustained.
Was Himalaya withdrawn? Himalaya wasn't Bitgo's biggest client, was it? Define biggest. Well, I mean, it's all relative, so you tell me. Were they the biggest client of Bitgo relative to others?
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, you can say whether it was big, medium, or small.
I wouldn't regard Himalaya as being a significant relationship compared to some other of the clients that we have. Sure. Okay. And after Bitgo fired Himalaya, you guys are still in business, right? After we closed Himalaya's account, Bitgo was still in business, yes. Yeah. You guys are still doing fine. Yes. Okay. Now you testified earlier that you proactively reached out to the FBI at some point in 2023, right? Yes. Okay. Now isn't it true that when you did that, Bitgo had been in touch with the government for some time? Which part of the government? Any part of the government. In relation to this account review? Well, let's put it this way, you, Bitgo, had received a subpoena from the government in the fall of 2022. I'm going to get it right this time. Yes, we did. Okay. And so you have lawyers at Bitgo. Yes, we do. Okay. And they were talking to lawyers for the government as part of responding to that subpoena. Well, Bitgo is obliged to respond, so they would have to have some type of communication. Certainly. I'm just confirming the fact they did. I wasn't necessarily privy to that communication. But I presume that something like that occurred. Okay. So Bitgo's lawyers were in touch with the government, so when you reached out to the FBI, you had already been in touch with the government for some time, right? We would have been communicating with agents and government personnel associated with the subpoena. Right. So you didn't reach out of the blue.
Mr. Horton said, objection.
The court said, he can say whether it was out of the blue.
For the outreach. A typical and standard step to take in that situation is to reach out to law enforcement. But it wasn't out of the blue. You knew who to call, right? Sorry. Can you say that again? You knew who to call, right? Yes, I believe the person I called, their details were on the subpoena. Mr. Skirek said, okay. Thank you. No further questions at this time.
The court said redirect?
Redirect examination. By Mr. Horton.
Mr. Roberts, you were asked a number of questions on cross-examination about Coinbase. Do you recall that?
I do.
From your review, did the Himalaya exchange operate like Coinbase?
Mr. Skirek said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
I recall in my review that the composition and nature of the Himalaya exchange did not align with an exchange like Coinbase profile.
And what do you mean that the composition of the Himalaya exchange did not align with Coinbase profile?
There could be various things there. But one big one for me being I recall the ability to make deposits in cryptocurrency and withdraw cryptocurrency off the exchange.
Can customers at Coinbase make deposits in cryptocurrency?
Mr. Skirek said, asked and answered.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Assuming we're talking about that particular product. I am of the impression that Coinbase customers can fund their accounts with a cryptocurrency transaction.
And could Himalaya exchange customers fund their accounts with cryptocurrency?
Based on my review, I did not find information that suggested that Himalaya exchange customers could fund their accounts with a cryptocurrency transaction.
You were also asked questions on Cross about the blockchain activity of Coinbase. Do you remember that?
Yes.
How does the blockchain activity of Coinbase compare to the blockchain activity you observed for the Himalaya exchange?
I would categorize it as significantly different.
What makes it significantly different? The blockchain activity you saw at the Himalaya exchange against the blockchain activity of Coinbase?
Coinbase has numerous customer deposits in cryptocurrency every day. Numerous customer withdrawals of cryptocurrency every day. They offer numerous different cryptocurrencies for trading. Among other things.
You testified that 99% of the Himalaya coin you observed was in the wallet controlled by the Himalaya exchange. Do you recall that?
I do.
Does Coinbase control 99% of any cryptocurrency?
I don't think I don't know if they. Mr. Skirik said, objection. Sorry.
The court said you may answer.
I would find it unlikely. But I'm not entirely aware of every single cryptocurrency they support today, right now.
Mr. Roberts, you described the Himalaya exchange as a closed loop. Is Coinbase a closed loop?
Coinbase has off-chain aspects.
And how do you compare the off-chain aspects at Coinbase to the off-chain aspects of the Himalaya exchange?
I would say that if we're taking Himalaya Exchange's customer who has HDO credits and wants to buy HCN, that trade is successful, it gets settled. I think that can be compared to a Coinbase customer that funds their account with US dollars, such as via a wire transfer, places an order for, say, Bitcoin, for example, and that trade settles. In both circumstances, I would describe that as off-chain activity.
Relatively speaking, what was the withdrawn, Your Honor? At Coinbase, can customers take crypto off of the exchange?
Yes, that is my understanding.
And can customers do that at the Himalaya exchange?
I did not find information that indicated it was possible for Himalaya customers to do that.
At Coinbase, can customers bring their own cryptocurrency wallets to the exchange?
They could bring their own cryptocurrency to the exchange.
And to do that, did they need to bring their own wallets?
You don't need to bring your own wallets. You could, once you created your account. You could simply fund your account with the cryptocurrency. You don't necessarily need to have or bring a wallet.
You testified about a number of questions you asked the Himalaya exchange and the answers they gave you.
Yes.
What, if anything, did the Himalaya exchange tell you about the H-coin lockup?
Mr. Skirik said, objection. Beyond the scope.
The court said you can answer.
I recall putting a question to Himalaya exchange about a potential lockup of tokens. And I recall receiving a response along the lines of no such lockup existed.
What, if anything, did the Himalaya exchange tell you about Freedom Media Ventures?
Mr. Skirik said, objection. Scope.
The court said, sustained.
You were asked a number of questions on cross, Mr. Roberts, about the Himalaya dollar reserves. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And you were asked questions about whether it's possible for the actual number of stable coins to be lower than the number that is shown as minted on the blockchain. Do you remember that?
Mr. Skirik said, objection.
The court said, sustained.
Mr. Roberts. You were asked questions on cross about whether it's possible for the number of stable coins in circulation to be lower than the number reported as minted on the blockchain. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you testified that you asked the Himalaya exchange questions about Himalaya dollar, is that right?
Yes.
And when, if ever, did the Himalaya exchange tell you that the number of Himalaya dollars was lower than what you had seen on the blockchain?
Mr. Skirik said, objection. Mischaracterizes.
The court said you may answer.
Sorry. Can you repeat that, please?
Was there ever a time that the Himalaya exchange told you that the number of Himalaya dollars actually in circulation was lower than what you observed on the public blockchain?
Mr. Skirik said, same objection.
The court said you may answer.
I don't recall a response by Himalaya exchange personnel pertaining to that.
Mr. Horton said, Ms. Loftus, can you pull up what's in evidence as BR 208A? Can you go to the second page, please? The line at the top here says US dollars held in Himalaya-owned bank accounts, and there's a figure of $400 million. What month in 2023 did you get this from the Himalaya exchange?
It was around January 2023.
And what, if anything, did the exchange tell you about whether these funds were still in their bank accounts when they gave you this document?
I don't recall a specific response by them about if they were still in there. But I felt that it was implied based on the questions we had asked and the documentation we had received. Mr. Skirek said, objection to that answer.
The court said, overruled. You may continue.
And what do you mean that you felt it was implied based on the information you got from the exchange?
I recall asking questions about how is the Himalaya dollar backed by US dollars. And they gave us back this documentation, so if it was no longer backed by US dollars, I would have thought they wouldn't have bothered to submit this type of documentation to us.
Mr. Roberts, you were asked various questions about the nature of stablecoin reserves on Cross. Do you remember that?
I do.
Are stablecoins meant to be commingled with an exchange's operating funds?
Mr. Skirek said, objection.
The court said you may answer.
For cryptocurrencies generally, I would expect customer funds or crypto customer and cryptocurrencies to be separate from the cryptocurrency exchange's own assets.
And you were also asked questions on Cross about the fees that the exchange paid to Bitgo. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And how much per month did the Himalaya exchange pay overall to Bitgo?
Per month, it was in the ballpark of $10,000 to $15,000 a month.
And how much of that $10,000 to $15,000 a month was for cold wallets?
It was somewhere in the realm of $10,000.
And did the Himalaya exchange use those cold wallets?
I do not recall the Himalaya exchange ever funding those cold wallets.
Mr. Horton said, could I have one moment, Your Honor?
The court said yes.
At the bottom of the document we're looking at, there's a name, Jesse Brown, CEO, and a signature. When, if ever, did you speak to Jesse Brown when you were reviewing the Himalaya exchange?
I do not recall ever speaking to a person called Jesse Brown in connection with the Himalaya exchange.
And did Mr. Brown join any of the calls that you had with the Himalaya exchange?
I do not recall an individual named Jesse Brown on either of the calls I had with the Himalaya exchange.
And what information, if any, did you get in your review from Jesse Brown?
Mr. Skirek said, objection.
The court said you may answer.
I don't recall receiving any documentation from a person called Jesse Brown.
Mr. Horton said, you can take this document down, Ms. Loftus. Mr. Roberts, you were asked to look at the white paper of the Himalaya exchange. Do you know if Min Ran Wu got the Himalaya exchange white paper?
Sorry. Can you repeat that?
Do you know if Min Ran Wu got the Himalaya exchange white paper?
Mr. Skirek said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, sustained.
Do you know what the Himalaya Farm Alliance is, Mr. Roberts?
I recall coming across that term in our account review. I don't have specific recollection of exactly what it is.
You were also asked questions on Cross about the grand jury subpoena that you received?
Yes.
Did the grand jury subpoena order you to conduct a review?
It did not.
Did the grand jury subpoena order you to close your relationship with the Himalaya exchange?
It did not.
And did the government ever direct you to close the relationship with the Himalaya exchange?
No.
Mr. Horton said, if I could have just one more moment, Your Honor. Mr. Roberts, in the course of your several months' review, did you understand what steps, if any, the Himalaya Farm Alliance took to distribute the Himalaya exchange's white papers?
I do not recall an event or receiving information about that. BR 212.
Mr. Horton said, no further questions.
The court said recross?
Mr. Skirek said, briefly, Your Honor. If we could just please bring up government exhibit and if you can just scroll down. Please. Yeah, just keep going. I'll let you know when to stop. Thank you. Okay. Great. Right there. Thank you.
Recross-examination. By Mr. Skirick.
Okay. Mr. Roberts, do you remember being asked questions about this document, which is in evidence? Earlier this afternoon by Mr. Horton. Yes. Okay. And he asked you, just to back up, withdrawn. To refresh everyone. This email is an exchange that someone at Bitgo had with someone at the exchange, right? Yes, this is an email between a Bitgo employee and personnel from Himalaya Exchange. Okay. And this is in March of 2023, right? Yes. And is it your understanding that this email exchange takes place as part of Himalaya's request to add new tokens to Bitgo's wallet capabilities?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection, Your Honor. It's beyond the scope of the redirect."
Mr. Skirick said, "Your Honor, I'm."
The court said, "I'll allow the question."
Mr. Skirick said, "Thank you. I believe that this string related to several things. One of which was a request by Himalaya to add an additional cryptocurrency. Okay. Now I just want to focus your attention on number 2 here quickly. And you were asked some questions about paragraph 2 by Mr. Horton, right? Yes. Okay. And the question that Bitgo posed to the exchange was why is it that only collateralized HDO credits are backed and audited? Why does HDO need to exist if it cannot be withdrawn off platform? And the answer, which you did not review with Mr. Horton. Am I correct?
Mr. Horton said, "Objection. Mischaracterizes."
The answer is.
The court said, "Sustained."
We are launching crypto capabilities soon for our coins. This is partly why we are asking for your support on the HEU, as we plan to launch HDO, HCN and HEU crypto deposits and withdrawals soon. Do you see that? I do. Okay. Is it your understanding that this is a member of the exchange or representative of the exchange telling Bitgo that they plan to launch crypto deposits and withdrawals? Yes, that's what it appears to be saying. Those would be on-chain crypto deposits and withdrawals, right? It doesn't actually specify on-chain. But I think I could reasonably say that may be what they're referring to. Right. There's no other way to deposit cryptocurrency with an exchange off-chain, is there? Well, you could do it off-chain. But it wouldn't make any sense to do it that way, right? Well, that would just be taking place on a private ledger. Right. So it's fair to say, just to make sure we're on the same page, that this reflects a statement from the exchange that they plan to have the ability to do crypto deposits and withdrawals from the Himalaya exchange. Right.
Mr. Horton said, "Objection. Asked and answered."
The court said, "Sustained."
Mr. Skirick said, "Okay. If we could go up to 1 and just blow that up, please." You were asked some questions on redirect by Mr. Horton about whether Himalaya ever used the cold wallet solution that Bitgo offered. Right. Yes, I was. And I think you said that they didn't, right? I said that they had. I do not recall that they ever funded their account. Okay. Fair enough. You don't recall that they funded it. Let's just take a look at one here. The question that your folks from Bitgo posed to the exchange was that Himalaya claims to keep 95% of their funds in cold storage. Why are you keeping the entirety of HDO, HCN in hot wallets at Bitgo right now? Is there an alternative custody solution you are currently using? Or are you simply waiting for the cold wallet setup to be finalized with us? And the answer is, it is the latter. Do you see that? Yes. He says, we are waiting for finalize our cold wallet setup. And we will soon complete the creation of cold wallets. Do you see that? Yes. So your understanding is that this is a representative of the exchange telling Bitgo that in fact they plan to start using cold wallets soon. Yes. Okay. Now you were also asked some questions by Mr. Horton about the comparison between Himalaya Exchange and Coinbase. Do you recall those? Sorry. Can you repeat that, please? Yeah, I'm sorry. So I should slow down. You were asked some questions by Mr. Horton a moment ago about a comparison between Coinbase and the Himalaya exchange. Right. Yes. Okay. Now there are any number of different cryptocurrency exchanges, right? Yes, I am of the impression there are numerous. Sure. Based on your experience at Bitgo and in the industry, what would you say? There are dozens. Hundreds. Hundreds, yeah, or more. Do they all operate the same way? They could have internal mechanics that are specific to themselves. Sure. Mr. Skirek said, no further questions.
Mr. Horton said, just briefly, Your Honor.
The court said, all right. Redirect.
Redirect examination. By Mr. Horton.
Mr. Roberts, you testified that the Himalaya exchange was a Bitgo customer for nearly 2 years. Is that right?
Approximately that much time, yes.
And Himalaya exchange paid for cold wallet storage every month they were a Bitgo customer, is that right?
I don't recall if they paid every single month. But I believe that's what the agreement they signed was stipulated.
And when, if ever, did they fund their cold wallets?
Mr. Skirek said, asked and answered.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
I do not recall that Himalaya Exchange ever funded their cold wallet with Bitgo.
And when the exchange said in March 2023, in the email that you were just shown on Cross, that we are launching crypto capabilities soon for our coins, what was your understanding about the exchange's crypto capabilities at the time of that statement in March 2023?
I recall thinking that they had not really built out an infrastructure for their crypto exchange to support cryptocurrency transactions.
What were the factors that led you to recommend termination with the Himalaya exchange that year?
Mr. Skirek said, objection. Asked and answered several times.
The court said, sustained.
Mr. Horton said, no further questions.
The court said, any recross?
Mr. Skirek said, no, Your Honor.
The court said, all righty, so you may step out.
Witness excused.